Was this the place where her life would end? Or was this where her new life would begin? The cold wind cut through the valley like a knife as Alara Hayes stood in front of the half-built cabin that was supposed to be her future. Her husband, Thomas, had dreamed of building them a home here in the Colorado mountains, a place filled with hope and new beginnings. Instead, he was gone, buried under a simple wooden cross just over the hill, and she was left alone, pregnant, frightened, and unprepared for the winter that was closing in fast. The land looked nothing like the beautiful dream Thomas had described in his letters. The logs of the unfinished cabin were already turning gray. The sky hung low with a strange purple color, and the wind stole every bit of warmth from her body. She pulled her worn shawl tight around her shoulders. It smelled like smoke and sadness, the only reminder of comfort she had left. She had gone to the nearby town of Providence only once since Thomas died. People stared at her with cold, judging eyes. Jedediah Thorne, the richest man there, had offered to buy her land for almost nothing. He spoke like he was doing her a favor. "A woman alone has no place in these mountains," he said, as if she were weak and helpless. "Let me take this burden from you. It is God's mercy." But she refused. It was the only thing she could do to hold on to her dignity. Now, standing in the freezing wind, her pride felt like a heavy stone in her stomach. Winter was not coming slowly. It was rushing toward her like a wild animal ready to strike. The cabin needed a roof, the walls needed to be sealed, and she had only 2 weak oxen left. She tried everything she could. She chopped wood until her hands bled and her muscles screamed. But the logs would not move the way Thomas had made them move. She was only one tired, grieving woman, trying to do the work of 3 strong men. She sat on the cold ground with her back against a pine tree and felt the weight of the silence around her. The forest did not care if she lived or died. The wind did not carry any hope. She could almost see herself becoming another sad story lost in the winter snow. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas smiling, strong and full of plans for their life. She took a shaking breath and stood back up. Ilara forced herself to pick up the axe again. She swung with all the strength she had left, but the blade barely scratched the tree. Her arms shook, tears filled her eyes, but she refused to cry. She kept trying until she could not lift the axe anymore. Unseen to her, someone watched from the trees above the clearing. Silas Blackwood stood hidden among the branches and shadows. He had watched her since the day she arrived. The people of Providence called him a savage because he lived with the Ute tribe and spoke little. He knew what struggle looked like, and he saw a fire in Alara that was close to dying. He saw her collapse to her knees that evening, defeated. Only when she finally went back to her wagon for the night did he move. He walked to the tree she had tried to cut down and swung his own axe. In only minutes, the tree fell. His strength was steady and sure. He cut 3 more, trimmed the branches, and left the logs stacked neatly for her before slipping back into the forest without a sound. The next morning, when Alara stepped outside, she froze. 4 perfect logs were waiting for her. She looked around with wide eyes. No tracks, no voice, no sign of who had helped her. Fear and hope mixed inside her chest. Someone had seen her struggle. Someone cared enough to help. Days passed. Then the storm came. The sky turned black without warning. Snow slammed against her wagon with wild force. The wind screamed outside. She wrapped herself in blankets, but the cold kept creeping in. She knew she would not survive the night. Then the canvas flap tore open, and a large man covered in snow appeared. She gasped, her heart racing. He pointed out into the storm, urging her to follow him. His eyes were intense, but not cruel. He held out a thick buffalo hide. She hesitated, but when the wagon groaned under the weight of snow, she knew she had no choice. She followed him into the storm. He held her arm so she would not fall. He led her through the darkness to a hidden shelter between huge rocks. Inside, a small fire burned warm and bright. He gave her the buffalo hide and sat near the entrance, guarding her from the storm outside. He did not speak. He did not demand anything. He simply kept her alive. For 2 days, They stayed in that small cave. He shared food with her, checked the storm, and kept the fire burning. His silence was calm, not threatening. She felt strangely safe. On the third morning, when the storm ended, he was gone. Panic hit her, but then she saw him returning through the snow with 2 rabbits in his hand. He had not left her. He had gone to bring food. That moment changed something inside her. She no longer felt completely alone. There was someone out there who saw her. Someone who wanted her to survive. When they returned to her land after the storm, the sight broke Elara's heart. The wagon leaned sideways under the snow, one of the oxen dead beside it. The other stood shivering and weak. Her small world looked ruined. She felt her knees weaken, but Silas did not let her fall into despair. Without a single word, he began clearing snow, showing her how to do it the right way so the water would drain. He saved what could be saved. He worked the way the mountains worked, quiet, steady, and strong. He knocked snow from the trees so the branches would not break and crush her camp. He showed her how to patch the wagon canvas using strips of hide. He gathered mud from the frozen creek bank and set it to thaw. When she looked confused, he pointed from the mud to the gaps in the cabin walls. "Wind," he said. It was only one word, but it carried guidance, not judgment. He was teaching her how to survive, how to understand the land, not fear it. As the days passed, she learned small things that made life less cruel. She learned where to find dry moss, how to stack logs so they wouldn't shift, how to listen to the woods for danger. Silas never stayed long. He helped, then slipped into the trees like a shadow. But every time he left, she already felt less afraid. A week later, Thorn returned. Elara was chinking the cabin walls with mud when she heard horses approach. Thorn rode with the deputy this time. His face twisted when he saw her progress. She was supposed to have failed by now. She was supposed to be desperate and ready to accept his offer. Instead, she was surviving. He stepped down from his horse, eyes cold. "Mrs. Hayes, this is not a life. You are alone. You cannot last another storm." "I will manage," she answered, without stopping her work. Her calm anger bothered him. He needed her weak, afraid, and willing to give up. He tried once more to buy her land, offering only a tiny sum. His voice sounded sweet, but his eyes were sharp with greed. "This land is not for sale," she said, standing tall. The false kindness dropped from his face. "You will regret this. There are ways to deal with squatters." With that threat, he rode away. Elara stood frozen, the mud on her hands turning cold. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with anger. He would not stop, not because he cared for her safety, but because he wanted what was hers. After Thorn left, she worked harder than before. She pushed through pain and exhaustion. Every log she placed was a promise to herself. Every stone she set was a reminder of her strength. She would not let anyone chase her away. Silas came again one evening, finding her struggling with a long ridgepole for the cabin roof. It was too heavy for her alone, and she felt defeat rising when she saw him. He put down the birds he had hunted, walked to the other side of the log, and nodded once. Now, together they lifted it. His strength guided hers, and soon the beam settled perfectly into place. Relief rushed through her. She looked at him with grateful eyes, and he gave a small nod as if to say it was always possible, just not alone. That night they shared food by the fire. They ate quietly, not needing to fill the silence. He pointed up at the stars and traced a shape with his finger. "The hunter," he said softly. "The long walking man." He was teaching her the sky, giving her pieces of a world she had not known. The silence between them was no longer cold. It felt peaceful. But trouble was not finished with her. 2 days later, she woke to find her water barrels smashed and her small winter garden trampled. Hoofprints in the dirt told her who did it. Thorn had come in the night. He had not broken her will, so he tried to break her spirit. For a moment she felt that old fear again. She dropped to her knees beside the shattered wood, tears of frustration filling her eyes. She thought Silas would appear and help her fix everything. But when he came, he looked at the damage, shook his head, and left without a word. His silence hurt more than the ruined barrels. She thought perhaps he believed she could not win this fight. She spent the evening melting snow and cleaning up alone. By nightfall, she felt the creeping fear of the valley pressing around her again. But the next morning, she saw them. 2 brand new barrels stood by her cabin. Perfectly made. Smooth. Strong. Built by a skilled hand. Silas had not abandoned her. He had done more than help. He had replaced what she lost with something better. It was not just kindness. It was protection. Thorn would not give up. But now, neither would she. The next time Thorn came, he did not come with words. He came with force. He brought 2 men with him, rough-looking and armed. They rode into her clearing with a plan to tear down her home and drag her back to town. Alara grabbed Thomas's rifle. She had never fired it before. Her hands shook as she loaded it. She stepped into the doorway and aimed, praying for strength. "Leave," she said. Thorn smirked, seeing her shaking hands. "She won't shoot." He ordered his men to pull the cabin down. One stepped forward. Alara closed her eyes, finger tightening on the trigger. Then a calm voice cut through the cold air. "That is far enough." Silas appeared at the edge of the trees like part of the mountain itself. He held his bow, calm and ready. The look in his eyes stopped all 3 men in place. "This land is hers," he said. "The mountain knows it." Thorn saw the truth in his voice. Saw a man who did not need to shout to make a threat. He left in anger, promising revenge. But he did leave. Alara lowered the rifle, shaking from the moment. Silas's eyes met hers. He saw her fear, her strength, her courage. He nodded once, respect. For the first time, she knew she was no longer fighting alone. "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know." The snow lay thick and untouched around the small cabin, sparkling under the pale winter sun. The world felt calm after the storm of men and danger that had passed. Alara stood outside, breathing in the cold air, watching the thin thread of smoke rise from her chimney. For the first time since Thomas died, the silence did not feel threatening. It felt safe. Silas stood a short distance away, scanning the tree line as if making sure no harm lingered. He had guarded her, but more than that, he had seen her strength with his own eyes. When he finally looked at her, there was a quiet respect in his gaze. "He will not return," Alara said softly. "No," Silas answered. "Men like him look for weakness. You are not weak." Quote. His words warmed her more than the crackling fire inside the cabin ever could. She had not believed she could survive this land alone. She had been terrified, lost, ready to break. But she didn't break. She fought. She learned. She changed. The land had taken so much from her, but it had also given her something she didn't expect, her own strength. She looked at the cabin, at the walls she had built with her hands, at the ridgepole she had lifted with Silas. It was not perfect. It leaned a little. The logs were not cut evenly. The mud between the wood was rough. But it stood, just like she did. Snowflakes began to fall again, soft and slow. Alara turned to Silas. "You should come inside," she said. "It's warmer by the fire." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't fear of being alone. It was something new, an invitation. He held her gaze for a moment, a long moment. Then he nodded once, stepping toward the cabin. They went inside together and closed the door, leaving the cold behind them. The fire filled the small space with a gentle glow. Alara placed an extra log on the flames, then sat down across from him. For a while, neither spoke. There was no need for words. The shared silence felt full, not empty. "You saved my life," she finally said. He shook his head slightly. "You saved your own life. I only helped." She thought about that. He was right. He gave her knowledge, guidance, protection, but she had fought every day to survive. She had faced fear, hunger, storms, and a cruel man who wanted to take everything from her. She had stood in her doorway with a rifle and did not run. "You were never alone," Silas added quietly. Her heart moved at the truth of it. Days passed, and though the winter held the mountains tight, life inside the cabin grew warmer. Elara learned to trap rabbits with Silas's help. She learned to track prints in the snow, to find dry wood hidden beneath fallen logs, to listen to the howl of the wind and know when a storm was coming. Silas did not just teach her how to survive, he taught her how to belong. He spent more time at the cabin, fixing what she could not, strengthening the roof, building shelves, carving a wooden rocking chair for her that she never expected to own. At night, they shared stories by the fire. Not many words, just enough. She learned he had lost family long ago, that he found peace in the mountains, and that he had chosen silence over a world that judged him without knowing him. One night, as the fire glowed soft and warm, Elara rested her hand on the small swell of her belly. The child she carried had felt like a burden when Thomas died, another weight she was not strong enough to hold, but now her heart felt different, steadier. "You should know something," she said, looking down. "I'm with child." Silas looked at her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes softened with something steady and grounding, not fear or doubt. He nodded once. "A child needs warmth," he said quietly. "A home. You built one." She felt tears rise, not from sadness this time, but from a deep, unexpected peace. Winter slowly loosened its grip. The snow melted in patches. Birds returned. The creek ran louder. The first green shoots of new life broke through the frozen earth. With the change of season came a change in Elara, too. She was no longer surviving, she was living. The moment she finally understood this was simple but powerful. One chilly morning, she walked outside and saw Silas repairing the fence near the cabin. He paused, looked up at her, and smiled. Not a wide smile, just a small one, but real. Home. She had a home. Elara stepped toward him. "Stay," she said softly. "Not because I need you to, but because I want you to." Silas looked at her for a long time, and in the quiet morning air, he spoke the words she didn't know she was waiting for. "I will stay." Not as a shadow, not as a guardian, but as a partner. They stood together at the edge of the cabin, the land stretching in front of them. It was still wild, still dangerous, still full of challenge. But now, they would face it side by side. The mountains had taken her old life, her old fears, her old weakness, but they had given her something greater in return, a new beginning, a new strength, and a man who saw not the widow she was, but the woman she had become. Together they turned toward the warm cabin, and for the first time the future did not scare her. It felt like hope,